98 Not Out, sponsored by Shepherd Neame, proud supporters of cricket in Essex.
So, welcome along to 98 Not Out. It's a big hello from the other side of the world to Ashley Gray. We've mentioned his book on the show previously. It's called The Unforgiven, about the West Indies rebel tour to South Africa in the 80s. Ashley, first off, how are you and how are things in Australia?
I'm well, thanks, Brett. It's just after 7 o'clock in the morning here, so I'm very fresh and ready to go. Things here are not at all like in Britain or Europe. Especially related to the coronavirus. We're only getting a few cases a day of infections, and but even that is a cause for concern. So the government's been on it really strictly from the beginning, and that's had a good effect. So we've almost eliminated coronavirus here. So things are slowly getting back to normal, and stadiums are like a quarter full, and soon they'll be a half full for all the various codes of football here and cricket. So
because summer's just starting over there, isn't it? Is it springtime there?
Yeah, it's springtime. Yeah, it just started sort of spring, but it's been quite warm, the weather, and also so you got all the football, the various football codes, Australian rules, rugby league. They're going to have their big grand finals at the end of this month. So things are just slowly getting back to normal, but there's just been a different approach here, and it seems to have worked.
Well done. So let's talk about this book. So you've been shortlisted on the Wisden
the Cricket Writers Club, which is all the cricket writers have their own club, don't they? Of all the well-known cricket writers.
Yeah.
And you've been shortlisted for their Book of the Year, is it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's very chuffed about that.
How did it come about? What was the process of the story?
Well, originally I was on a tour of West Indies in 2003 when Australia were touring there, and it was the last of the 4 test or 5 test series that Australia played against the West Indies, which is kind of sad because it just shows you how far they've fallen. I was over there. I was doing a bit of reporting and also a bit of a holiday as well. But I'd just been to Sabina Park for a one-dayer, and I had the press pass dangling around my neck, and I was in the taxi, and we got to chatting about cricket because he saw my pass, the taxi driver, and I'd heard about Richard Austin, and the taxi driver said, well, look, I can take you to see Richard Austin. Richard Austin was a 2-test all-rounder who played in the late 70s, but also played Lancashire League cricket in England. The taxi driver said that he was begging on the street and he'd be able to take me to exactly where he was, in a place called Crossroads in the middle of Kingston. This is in Jamaica, of course. And he did, and there was Richard. He was in the gutter, and he was drinking rum from an old Coke bottle, and he was running with a gang of sort of fellow drifters, and he wanted money for cocaine. Anyway, I interviewed him, and as we talked, and we sort of got past the sort of drunken ranting that he was doing, he was actually quite a smart guy, smart and funny guy. And he said to me that the reason why he had ended up in the gutter was because he had gone to South Africa on these rebel tours of the early 1980s. And when he came back home to Jamaica, he was flush with cash, but the problem was his Jamaican countrymen no longer tolerated him, or were no longer friendly with him in the way that they had been beforehand, because they had considered the fact that he'd gone to apartheid South Africa, taken about $100,000 US, that was an act of it was traitory, really, and that he had taken blood money, and so he was ostracized. He had all this money, but he was banned from cricket as well, and his life had just spiraled out of control. It was kind of a ludicrous conversation in many ways, because he was 48 and he was begging me to call his good friend Kerry Packer, with whom he played during World Series cricket. And he wanted me to call him because he was going to come to Australia and coach New South Wales and play for them. But obviously that wasn't really going to happen. But that was kind of the state he was in. But, I could see that there was a bigger story there. And over time, it was in the back of my head to do it. And I was the first guy to report on Austin. And I know Michael Atherton did later, and that Austin became a sort of poster boy for what happened to the rebels. But I knew that I was probably the only person other than Michael that could have written this story, because Richard died in 2015. But as I said, I knew there was a bigger story, because there were obviously more guys who went on those tours. And I finally got the chance to do it over the last couple of years. And that's why the book is here now. Yep.
Was it just money that they went for? Or, I mean, given that high-profile players such as Viv Richards and Michael Holding had been so outspoken about not going and not taking the blood money, to use your term. In speaking to all of these guys that went, what was your feeling? I mean, was it just a financial thing, or how did they put aside the views of the big stars of the game?
Yeah, sure. Look, it was mainly financial. You've got to remember that, say in Jamaica, that Everton Mattis and Richard Austin and Lawrence Rowe and Herbert Chang and Ray Winter, the guys who went, they were offered a base wage of $80,000 US, which was over 60 times more than the Jamaican would expect to earn in a year. So it was money that would have set them up for life. So they were, it was very enticing. And the SACU knew this, Ali Bucker knew this, and so did Joe Pomensky, that, that these guys were coming often from ghetto backgrounds. They had little in the way of finance, and they were really pretty much there for the taking, I think, in a way that perhaps the Australian and English guys weren't, because they were coming from first world countries where these guys were already pretty comfortable anyway. The guys that went on the Australian and English tours, whereas the West Indian guys, they were in some cases pretty desperate states, that they really only had the chance to play in Shell Shield, and possibly also, which was only 4 or 5 games a season. Plus, if they were lucky, they got a contract in one of the leagues in England. But other than that, there was some sort of minor coaching jobs they could pick up in the Caribbean. But it wasn't anything at all like in Australia or England, where you could where Test players are revered and they go on to the next level, which is often in the commentary box or on the board of a company, or they're fated. But these guys could not be fated in the same way. So they were ripe for the picking, I think, and that's what happened. And so were they conscious of the backlash? Yeah, they knew that they were going to cop it, but they never thought they were going to cop it so bad. That was the thing, they thought after the English were banned for 3 years, we might get something similar. So when they were banned for life, that really hit home hard, and especially on someone like Richard Austin, for whom cricket was his life. That's how he sort of identified himself, and that's how he had come to find happiness in his life. And all of a sudden to have that taken away, and to also have the opprobrium of his countrymen, was something that he couldn't handle, and a lot of the guys couldn't handle. So but they knew about Holding, and they knew about Clive Lloyd and Viv Richards. I mean, the thing is about that, as Roland Butcher told me, and I know he's been on your show. He said to me that it was good that Holding and Lloyd and Richards, that they criticised the tours, and they're justifiably right to do so, because obviously apartheid was an evil regime, and there was a sense in which these guys were helping legitimise it. But by the same token, they had said it from a position of power and security, in that these guys were legends of the game, and they were going to be set up pretty much for life afterwards. You know, these were, as I said, you know, absolute legends. So it was easier for them to say that. And as Roland Butcher pointed out to me, would they have said the same things if they were in the same position as, say, Lawrence Rowe, whose career was sort of pretty much over, or Richard Austin, or David Murray, who looked like he was never going to play for the West Indies again, you know, even though he was probably the best wicketkeeper that the Caribbean had ever seen. So, yeah, so Roland said to me, you know, would Holding and Lloyd and Richards have said the same things if they were in the same position? And if they had, that would have been fantastic, but we'll never know because, yeah, they came from a position of sort of almost prestige, you know, compared to these other guys who were sort of on the fringes of West Indies cricket by this stage.
Were they prepared for some of the treatment they got when they arrived in South Africa? Because I know that there's the famous story of Alvin Kalituran getting asked to move from his seat on a train because...
Oh, yeah, Colin Croft, in fact, yeah.
Oh, it was Colin Croft, sorry, Colin Croft. Yeah. Who's someone that I wouldn't argue with. But,
yeah, exactly, me neither.
You know, were they prepared for that, or was that something they just thought it's part of the of how they're going to earn their money?
Yeah, look. For the most part, they were in a bubble. You know, they were in a gilded sort of bubble because they just went from one international hotel to another. They were able to go to bars. They were able to do things that your regular person of colour in South Africa wasn't able to do. And they were almost like honorary whites. They weren't officially honorary whites, but the way that they were able to move so freely meant that they did things that a regular guy on the street could never hope to do. And I mean, you know, they had white women in their hotels. They were, you know, they were fated wherever they went. You know, they were taken to gold jewelry stores in Johannesburg and able to buy, you know, chunky gold pendants, whatever, for you know, which were quite the thing back then, for like 10% of the price, this kind of thing. So they were really looked after, and it was only rare that apartheid sort of penetrated their bubble. And then that Croft incident was one of the times when that happened, when he was getting on a train in I think it was in Cape Town, and he went onto a white carriage, as it was then, and the train conductor asked him to move to another carriage, and a white guy actually intervened on Colin's behalf. But the mere fact that this had happened to a test cricketer of some renown created an international incident at the time, and it shone a light on what happened regularly to black people every day in South Africa. And yeah, so it was, the interesting thing about that was that the SACU apologised to Colin for that incident, and so did the government. But the government didn't apologise to the black people that sort of incident happened to on every day of their lives. So yeah, there were, as I said, there were occasions when apartheid sort of snuck through and it confronted the rebel tourists. But for the most part, as I said, they were they lived in a bubble, and they were treated like kings, and the white crowds loved them for it, you know.
Actually, how easy or hard was it getting access to as many of the players you spoke to, or finding the stories?
Yeah, well, it was bloody difficult, to be honest, and especially with someone like Colin Croft, whom I pursued with emails, calls, you know, WhatsApp, anything really. His friends, and when I finally did get to speak to him, he said, the reason why I haven't answered any of your emails or spoken to you on the phone is because I want nothing to do with you or your project. And he just hung up after that. But that was Colin, you know. But you know, I expected that from him, and that kind of confirmed at least his public persona to me. But yeah, I had to, the other guys, because I ended up speaking to everyone except Sylvester Clarke, who'd obviously passed away in 1999. So the other guys had to build their trust. They were wary of a white guy who didn't really know, who had no real reason to be doing this story other than, it was a part of history that hadn't been tackled before, and that I felt that these guys could find perhaps some closure through it. But I had to convince them that was the case, and that I was fair dinkum, as we say in Australia. I was the real deal, and it wasn't easy to do that because they had reason to be sceptical of me. But one of the interesting things that actually played in my favour was I friended a couple of them on Facebook, and when I was actually travelling through the Caribbean, and I'd meet with one of the guys and I'd stick that up on Facebook, and then the other guys would see it and they'd see that I was actually there and I was talking to these guys. And, especially when I saw Lawrence Ryan, I put that up because he was the captain of the side. And when they saw that Lawrence was, he was taking part and that he was telling his story, a lot of the other guys felt more confident about it as well. But yeah, it was tough. And, there were lots of times when, especially in the Caribbean, it's a beautiful sort of holiday spot, and I'd be waking up the next day, sort of in a sort of case of having a bout of mild depression because I'd been rejected the night before by a couple of guys, and I was wondering, where do I go with this? So yeah, it was hard, but yeah, in the end, I got most of them, and their stories are there, and it's great to have the rest of the world finally paying attention to these guys and what happened to them, and how one decision when they were young men in their 20s really, had massive consequences way beyond anything they could have ever imagined.
Has time been a healer with all of this? I mean, I get the sense that this has been a sorry episode that has been swept under the carpet for a long number of years. And maybe now it's time to have a conversation about it, and maybe these guys feel confident enough to give their side of it. And do you think, from the wider picture, from West Indian society and West Indian cricket, that they're prepared to now be a bit more forgiving? Or
in some ways, yeah. In some ways, yes, but in other ways, no. I mean, it's been difficult for me to get coverage in the Caribbean, as opposed to, say, England and Australia, where there's been a big take-up of the book. But the coverage in the Caribbean has been quite sporadic. I mean, there might be other reasons for that. Obviously, COVID is about. But yeah, I think that there's at least in some parts of the Caribbean, that there's a willingness to forgive, but there's not a willingness to forget, or to sort of tell these guys that maybe we perhaps went too far in the way that we treated you when you came back to the Caribbean, because they didn't actually commit a crime as such, but they have been moral criminals for pretty much the rest of their lives, and yeah, I think there is, especially in the case of Richard Austin, he was, castigated and ostracized for the majority of his life, and then, but towards the end, there was a sense among people from the upper echelons of Jamaican society that perhaps they'd gone too far, and that there was a sort of a sense of sympathy for his plight and for the fact that he was now living on the street, and I think the fact he was so in their face when he was on the street, it forced them to confront, how they had treated the rebels, which is not to say that the rebels did not deserve the criticism they got, because there had been for so many years a massive and justifiable anti-apartheid sentiment in the Caribbean, and guys like Michael Manley, who was the Prime Minister of Jamaica in the 70s. He got up in the UN and spoken out against apartheid, and he'd actually spruiked a land, sea, and air boycott of the whole country, of all of South Africa. So that goes to show you how intense the feeling was there. So the guys now, some of them still carry the scars, and some of them have great regrets about going because of the way it changed their lives. And I know that recently one of them was going to, who thought he had been forgiven, and I won't mention who he was going to run for election in one of the Caribbean countries, and he in recent elections there, and he. But I was told from someone from the other side of politics that they were going to bring up the fact that he'd been on the rebel tours, and that would have kiboshed his political ambitions. So you can see that it's still alive there. It's still a live issue. And Lawrence Rowe was going to be, his name was going to be on the pavilion, the batting pavilion at Sabina Park as an honour for him. This was like 9 years ago. And so the JCA, the Jamaica Cricket Association, got that happening. He came over to Sabina Park during a test match, and he was given the honour. But then within 3 months, the backlash was so extreme that his name was taken down because of the fact that he had captained this tour, to these rebel tours, and he was thought to have brought shame upon his nation. So yeah, it's still a live issue, and still continues to have ramifications for all these guys,
Well, actually, obviously,
sorry, go on.
I was about to say, it's obviously a massively fascinating book for those that are into cricket and the history of. Available, I know it's available on Amazon and other sites as well. Is there anywhere particular, if they want to get maybe a signed copy from you or something, they can get?
They could Facebook me. There's also, I've got a Facebook page for the Unforgiven, the Unforgiven cricket book by Ashley Gray, I think it is. But you could also Facebook me, Facebook friends, and I could get you I could sign a copy, write whatever you want in the front pages there. All the high street bookshops in England, it's all there. Amazon, you can, if all fails, go to Amazon, I suppose. You're always going to get something there. That's pretty much the case in England. But yeah, it's readily available there, so you should be able to get it. But yeah, feel free to contact me if you want a signed copy. Happy to do it.
Ash, can I just get your thoughts on a parallel between the situation that you've written about and modern day West Indian cricket, where the backdrop to me seems quite similar in terms of the players there's no real money in cricket for cricketers and for the sport. We had Clive Lloyd on a few weeks ago, was telling us about the huge financial cost of staging international tours in the West Indies. The amount is spent on travel, accommodation, etc., etc. And you've mentioned already the decline of West Indian cricket over the last, say, 25, 30 years, coinciding with the rise of the IPL, which has just got underway again. And we've seen, arguably the biggest, most talented West Indian players just forget about playing local cricket and chasing this whole franchise thing, whether it's IPL, Big Bash, etc., etc. Would you draw parallels between then and now?
Yeah, I mean, it is a poorer region, and because of the sort of overlay of slavery and what happened for so many years after sort of the liberation in the 1830s or whatever it was, it's a hangover from that, and these islands that were once had big sugar export economies are now they're barely sort of tourist islands, and so they're still dependent on on their almost on their imperial masters and on Europe and the rest of the first world for their income, you know. So they're in a, so anyone who grows up there is perhaps in a position whereby they can be tempted by the big money that's on offer at the in the IPL, you know, if they're a sportsman as such in the IPL or in the BBL here, you know, and they're going to go for that over Test cricket, which doesn't offer the same remuneration, you know. I think they're still ripe for exploitation, and that's kind of sad. I think one of the things that the Rebel Tours did as well was back in the 80s. Obviously, the West Indies was dominating world cricket, and it had a production line seemingly of fast bowlers who'd come and terrorised the world. But
batting wasn't too bad.
Sorry.
The batting wasn't too bad either.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the fielding too. Yeah. Lots of all-round talent there. But then you lost with the Rebel Tours. You lost 20 guys with with almost 200 tests worth of experience, who were no longer putting back into the game. And you had, and this is what Jeffrey Duzon said to me. You had someone like Lawrence Rowe, who was so technically beautiful, and someone who would have been able to teach batsmen to play the proper way. You know, Viv Richards was the master blaster, but he was sort of hitting across the line. He was unorthodox, and he was brilliant because of that. But you also needed people who could teach the way the game should be played in a basic kind of sense. And Jeffrey Duzon said to me, it was one of his biggest laments that Rowe did go, and that he was lost to the game, because he would have been a fantastic coach, and yet he has never been asked to coach in Jamaica since, because he is just his star has fallen so far there, you know. And then you had David Murray, who people still say is the best keeper that the West Indies ever produced. So there is a school of thought that, you know, banning the Rebels and not having all that experience being channeled back into the game was at least one of the factors in why the West Indies slowly began to taper off, you know, by the sort of early 90s, you know. Even England were winning tests against the West Indies, you know. A bloody great shock, I've got to say. So I don't know whether that necessarily, is a valid argument, but I think there's something to it, you know.
Ashley, thank you very much for your time. We'll just remind everybody, the book is called The Unforgiven, Mercenaries or Missionaries.
That's what it looks like.
There you go.
Even better.
It's about the Rebel West Indies tours to South Africa in the 80s, available from all good bookstores. And if they do want to get in touch with you, get via Facebook, and you'll sort them out a signed copy or get a copy.
I can also go by Twitter. My handle is AshG66, ASHG66. So they can follow me there, and I'll follow them, and we can chat. So
no worries.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate being on the show. Fantastic.
Cheers, and we'll get you all on our social media as well. Thank you very much.